Deep in the archives of the Chester Historical Society is a story of love, jealousy, intrigue, and murder. All the ingredients for a murder mystery, the makings of a Hollywood movie. This story can be found in a nondescript scrapbook from 1899 belonging to Alice Kirtland. When curator Diane Lindsay handed me this item, little did I realize what lay inside. As I opened the cover to the first page, I was struck by the bold print. A cold-blooded murder. Harry Chadwick of Chester struck down by his rival. Harry Chadwick, the name sounded so familiar. I had heard of this murder, but the name stuck with me. I had seen this name before, and so I read on to see what happened. The shoreline was shocked when the news spread on the morning of July 17, 1899, that a gruesome murder may have taken place. One man lay near death, covered in blood, at the home of J. Tyler Smith. Another man was missing. A crime scene with a bloody hat, a blood-stained rock, and evidence of a struggle. With facts scarce, rumors spread quickly. All eyes were focused on the residence of J. Tyler Smith. Smith was a pillar of the community, having served as constable, registrar, selectman, and state representative. It was implausible that such a crime could be connected to a family with an impeccable reputation. It was 2:30 in the morning when the Smith household was awoken by the cries for help from Joseph Howe, a carpenter who had been boarding with the family the past few months while working on the building of Benjamin Harwood's new mansion, today Erin Manor. Upon entering the room, Louis Smith found Howe on the bed, covered with blood and in a weak and exhausted condition. Dr. Fred Sumner Smith was immediately sent for, and upon examination, Howe was found to have a long, deep cut on his face, extending from the right ear to the point of the chin. He was soaked in blood. Upon a search of the house, his bicycle was found in the cellar, covered in blood, and a ladder had been placed against the house leading to Howe's bedroom window. Had Howe been the victim of foul play? Had someone tried to murder him? Howe had gone off to bed at 9 o'clock the night before. Had he gone out later? Why did he enter the house by ladder? Within hours, it was clear that Howe was not the victim, but instead had hatched a sinister plot. Harry Chadwick, who was employed in New Britain, rode his bike each Saturday to Chester to visit his fiancée, Miss Mary Smith, known as May, the daughter of J. Tyler Smith. On a July weekend in 1899, Chadwick had come to visit May on Saturday to leave the following evening. Around 11:30 Sunday night, he kissed his sweetheart goodnight and started on his long ride back to New Britain. That was the last time Harry Chadwick would be seen alive. J. Tyler Smith, surmising that something may have happened to Harry Chadwick, quickly rounded up a party to look for him. But before setting out around 7:30 the next morning, son Louis Smith was sent to Bates's shop to telephone Chadwick's employer, the Stanley Works of New Britain. It was learned that Harry Chadwick had not returned the night before, nor had shown up for work. The men set out to retrace the route Chadwick would have taken on his journey to New Britain, but in their hearts they knew that a terrible tragedy had occurred. As Louis Smith would later recall, not far from the Haddamtown line, we first saw blood. We kept on the bottom of the hill, and there we saw where blood had formed in a little pool. We rode up the turnpike, and near the corner of the little cemetery, just north of Tylerville, we found a razor case. About 8 rods further on, we came upon the evidence of a death struggle. Here we found a cap with bloodstains, one similar to that worn by Joseph Alonzo Howe while working at the Benjamin Harwood building site. Nearby was found Harry Chadwick's watch and chain, along with pieces of a broken straight razor. The grass nearby showed signs of a body having been dragged. At that point, Louis and his companions had yet to find Harry Chadwick. He later recounted that he saw Frank Watrous, who said there were bloody stones on the nearby shore of the Connecticut River where his boat had been tied up the day before. The boat was soon found with Chadwick's bloody cap inside. It was not until the next day, after dragging the river for hours, that Harry Chadwick's body was recovered. The body was pulled to the surface. For those present, the sight was terrifying, as it was clear that he had been brutally murdered. The next day, when the autopsy was performed by Dr. M.C. Hazen of Haddam, it confirmed that Howe's story of self-defense and accidental choking contradicted his findings. Harry Chadwick had suffered heavy blows to the head, with death caused by a final blow behind the neck. The Deep River New Era reported there were many damp eyes amongst the crowd on shore, and when the mutilated remains of the poor boy were brought to land. Joseph Howe was quickly imprisoned at the Haddam jail. Howe maintained his innocence, but finally relented in stating, "I went to scare Chadwick. He came to me. We had a scuffle for some time. He cut me. I shouted for help. I caught him by the throat and held on. I did not intend to hurt him, but I got desperate and kept holding on." This took place right next to the cemetery just north of Tylerville in Haddam. Realizing what he had done, he decided to dispose of Chadwick's lifeless body in the Connecticut River. He found a boat but needed something to stop the body from floating to the surface. Chadwick's bicycle was the answer. Howe would state, "I then tied the bicycle to the body and rowed the boat down the creek to the Connecticut River and threw the body overboard." This took place at Clark's Creek, just south of Tylerville in Haddam. It was soon discovered by the authorities that the night before, a man had been seen riding a bike down Water Street toward the highway, what is today Route 154, shortly after Joseph Howe had supposedly gone to bed, but before Harry Chadwick had left the Smiths' home for his bike ride back to New Britain. Had Joseph Howe been lying in wait for his unsuspected victim? It was also discovered that Joseph Howe had served time in a state reform school as a child and had a family with a history of mental illness. The authorities soon rejected his story of self-defense. On Thursday, July 20th, 1899, a coroner's inquest was held in what was then known as the Chester Town Hall, today the Meeting House. 20 witnesses were called to testify. The first to take the stand was J. Tyler Smith, who related Howe's relations with his family, as well as Harry Chadwick's courting of his daughter, May. He went on to relate finding the bloody Joseph Alonzo Howe on his bed in the early hours of the morning in the events leading up to finding of Harry Chadwick's body. Sons Louis and Alden Smith were called to the stand with stories that corroborated their fathers. Others called to the stand were Dr. Fred Sumner Smith, Dr. C.M. Hazen, Haddam's medical examiner, and E.B. Pratt, an undertaker from Deep River. Interestingly, May Smith was not called to the stand, but when asked, Alden Smith stated that if there was a motive to be tied to Joseph Alonzo Howe, it would be the jealousy of Harry Chadwick's relationship with his sister, May. 10 days later, on the morning of July 30th, 1899, the Haddam Town Hall, being next door to the Haddam jail where Howe was being held, was packed when an initial inquiry was done. Howe was offered the opportunity to relate his story. Afterwards, Howe was taken back to jail to await trial. The trial began 6 months later in Middletown on December 12, 1899, with Howe arriving each day from the Haddam jail in shackles. All of Middlesex County and Connecticut were captivated by the details of the trial. Each day, reporters scrambled to make the afternoon edition. The more sensational, the better the sales. When the trial ended, it was clear from the testimony of the Smith family and other Chester residents that Joseph Alonzo Howe had been infatuated with J. Tyler Smith's daughter, May, one of Chester's fairest belles. She was engaged to 23-year-old Harry Chadwick, a former employee of C.J. Bates. Chadwick had wished to do better for himself and 3 months earlier had taken a job in New Britain with the Stanley Works. Each weekend on Saturday or Sunday, Harry would bike down from New Britain, spending the day with May and her family. At the same time, 31-year-old Joseph Howe had been boarding with the Tylers while working as a hired carpenter building Benjamin Harwood's home. May quickly caught his eye. Whispers abounded throughout Chester that May, while engaged to Harry Chadwick, had often spent time with Joseph Howe as they had common interests. It was noted at the inquiry that Joseph and May would be seen bicycling together, going on photography excursions throughout Chester, and trips to New Haven and Middletown. It was even stated by Daniel Chadwick, father of Harry Chadwick, that he felt May did not care for his son, and that his wife had received a letter from May's mother excusing the actions of her daughter. What did all this mean? Was this a friendship, or was May engaging with two men at once? One thing was clear. May was spending time with Howe during the work week, and Chadwick on the weekends, and this did not go unnoticed by town folks. In the trial, Howe would testify, "Mary and I rode together, took pictures, developed them, and were often in the parlor together. She told me she liked me, and I told her I liked her. We were often together for hours. We kissed each other, hugged each other, and threw my arms around her neck. Her mother did not know the extent of our intimacy." When May came to the stand, she testified that Howe had never made love to her, and though they had accompanied each other frequently on their bicycles, there had been no impropriety. She went on to say that he had never hugged or kissed her. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When it was over, the jury deliberated for almost a day. It was later reported that, like a solemn procession of funeral mourners, the 12 jurymen funneled back into the courtroom. As the foreman rose, the only sound was the crisp unfolding of a small piece of paper. May Smith, Joseph Howe, prosecutors and defendants alike all drew a collective breath. "We find Joseph Howe guilty of murder in the second degree. Judge Ralph Wheeler sentenced him to life in prison at Withersfield." Many in Chester were left to wonder about the motives of Joseph Howe. Had he been infatuated with a young woman and would not accept that she loved someone else? Had May Smith led him to believe that she loved him more? Was May playing two men against one another? In the end, no one would ever know. She would go on to be publicly humiliated and hounded by gossip and blame. People accused her of leading Howe on. This, compounded with her consuming grief at the loss of her fiancé, forced her to move to Philadelphia, where she lived for the rest of her life, never having married. May Smith died on May 26, 1938. She was brought back to Connecticut and buried in Fountain Hill Cemetery in Deep River. After serving 19 years in Wethersfield prison, Joseph Howe appeared before the Board of Pardons and was granted parole and released in 1919. He lived and worked as a carpenter in Hartford for 18 years until he died on March 12, 1937. Both May Smith and Joseph Howe stood by their stories until the end. In the days and weeks that followed Chadwick's untimely death, certain citizens morbidly fascinated by the murder sneaked down to the river at night and painstakingly carved off pieces of the bloody rowboat. Funeral services for Harry Chadwick were held at the Chester Baptist Church, today the United Church of Chester. Every seat was taken and chairs had to be placed in the aisle. The casket was overflowing with flowers sent by shopmates at Stanley Works New Britain and former shopmates at C.J. Bates. Harry Chadwick's family sat in front near the pulpit, with the family of J. Tyler Smith sitting nearby. May Smith, too overcome with grief and the shock to her nerves, did not attend and was confined to her bed. After reading through the scrapbook in the archives of the Chester Historical Society, I realized why Harry Chadwick's name was so familiar. I had walked by his grave for years whenever I visited Laurel Hill Cemetery. And now it is providential that we are talking about Harry Chadwick's murder as it took place 125 years ago. As I researched this tragedy, it felt so distant, not real. That all changed when Chestertown historian Rob Maselli contacted me that he had a box of material relating to Harry Chadwick, a box of old letters that had come down through his family. He was not certain about his family's connection to this tragedy, if there was one. Upon seeing the contents of the box, I almost fell over. There were newspaper clippings from the time, letters from May Smith to Harry Chadwick, and heartfelt letters to Harry's mother after the murder. But it was the photo of Harry Chadwick that completed the story for me. It was a cabinet card of Harry Chadwick. I could finally see the young man whose life had been cut short all those years ago. Harry Chadwick was now real. One final note. Nearly 50 years ago, as a young child growing up in Chester, whenever a good depth of snow would fall, I would trudge from my home on Maple Street up Prospect Street and shovel Maud Smith's sidewalk. She was a very old, very small, bespectacled woman. After completing my shoveling, before collecting my few dollars, she would often have me into her kitchen for a cup of hot cocoa. It was not until many years later, long after Maud Smith had passed and Diane Lindsay had shown me this scrapbook, that I discovered Maud Smith had been born in Chester. Her maiden name was Maud Emmons when she married Stanley Smith, the grandson of J. Tyler Smith. Stanley Smith was the son of May's brother Alden. Oh, the story Maud must have known, the family secrets that must have been kept. Today I wish so very much I had known of this trial and asked Maud Smith about her husband's family, maybe finding out who May Smith really did love. I'm not sure she would have known the truth. Unfortunately, the dead don't give up their secrets.